so xenophobic? What's wrong with this plant just because it's not from here? You know, are you secretly harboring some anti-immigrant type of attitude here? You know, and that's so frustrating to me to have. And those are well-meaning people, you know, nature-loving people who are now battling for this plant just because they see maybe that we're just attacking it because it's not from here. I think that's a really scary circumstance in the evolution of these environmental discussions. Here's one of my favorites because I study these guys, big snails, right? Your biggest land snails on Earth. They're wonderful in Africa. They're awesome in African forests. Bring them to the United States or into Brazil, and they go crazy, and they just move across these landscapes and devour all the vegetation in sight. They were transported around the world during the World Wars as a cheap source of food because they're used as food in Africa. They're escargot in Africa. They're a great food source, lots of protein. So during the World Wars, they were transported around the tropics, around the world, so that communities could raise them cheaply as a food. Well, no one really, culturally, to take to a new food is complicated. So people raised them a little bit, ate some of them, didn't really eat them, and then they escaped into all these areas and became invasives. And one of the things that has happened in the past, where ecologists have failed epically in attempting to manage some invasives, is in introducing a new non-native species to help try to manage the problematic species. And there are some spectacular examples of this, including introducing predatory mollusks to attack previously invasive mollusks. And the secondary introduced mollusks may indeed eat the first introduced mollusks, but they also eat all the native mollusks. So then and all of a sudden the ecologists are blushing because they may have recommended it, but now you have a secondary introduction that's also problematic. And that's happened in other organisms as well. So with our biological controls that we try to use to manage, there's been some spectacular success stories in that regard too. But you just have to be really careful because the unforeseen consequences are often many. The Bay, the San Francisco Bay, is considered one of the most polluted bodies of water in the world in terms of the biota, because it has so many introduced species within it. A huge percentage of the biomass in the bay is made up of introduced species. Where are a lot of these coming from? Does anyone know some of the basis for this? Well, yeah, it's not just what part of the world, but how are they coming from different parts of the world? Go ahead. Ballast in ships, yeah. And new legislation has been just written this year to try to work on that. But ships take on ballast water, right, to help, especially when they don't have a heavy cargo. They take on ballast water and travel to a port where they're going to pick up containers and heavy materials. And when they get there, they'll release their ballast water that's held in the ship. So they'll just drain the ship of its waters that they may have taken on in Europe or Asia or South America. They've taken on Asian waters, South American waters, European waters, get to San Francisco, release it into the bay, and then take their containers on and to replace that weight with a new weight. Well, it's full of algae, it's full of microorganisms, and they find the bay all too nice a place to live and set up shop. And the crabs and the invasive kelps and all the microorganisms get established, bump out the natives, can be competitive exclusion, and you have a whole new dynamic. I mentioned in a previous lecture that we don't take into account the services that ecosystems provide. We don't do that well in factoring in the importance of ecosystems in our models, our economic models. What are some of these services that ecosystems provide to us that we usually don't factor in? Pollination, the pollinating services of creatures is one, for example. What are some others? Yeah, the nitrogen cycle. Yeah, the natural role that plants can play in fixing nitrogen for us. Farmers are getting better about planting crops that do fix nitrogen, either in between the rows of those that don't, or during the season when after their crops are harvested. What else? Yeah. Recharge groundwater. Yeah. Water retention services that forests provide. We talked about how when you cut a forest and the water runs off, you can see increases in flooding. That's not factored into the value of a forest. Someone will look at forest land and say, let's develop it. It's so valuable as a new development. But you don't factor in its value in terms of the water retention service that it's performing for your community. And you can remove it, develop it, but then you lead to flooding later and catastrophic loss of money as a result of the flooding consequences. Anything else? Yeah. Cultural or spiritual services. Yeah. How do you put a dollar value on the spiritual value of these systems? Your double rainbow. That's so cool. How do you put a monetary value on double rainbows? You don't. It's not in the economic marketplace. That's something that we either intrinsically value or maybe we don't. But many people do. Just the inherent aesthetic value and spiritual value that it has. So for many people, there's just a moral aspect to the wish to preserve these organisms as they are. They deserve protection because they are natural creatures, either created as such or evolved as such. Doesn't matter for some people. They deserve protection just morally. It's a moral issue, not an economic issue. But if you want some of these other services that ecosystems provide, you can check this list and think about some of these roles that ecosystems play. Personal values would be the type that we just mentioned. So what do countries do in terms of trying to affect change with regard to conserving systems that are under assault from modification for development or degradation as a result of climatic changes? All countries are different in this regard. Costa Rica has sort of set a high bar for what can be done in a country in terms of protecting the landscape, and this is a really interesting country. If you ever can save up the resources to make a trip to the tropics, why not? Go to Costa Rica. They deserve it. They deserve your tourist dollars because of how much they've put into their natural infrastructure. So a large percentage of their country is in protection, has protected status, and the citizens are very proud of it. And this tends to be, by any measure, a happy culture. Gross national happiness is estimated around the world for different countries. Costa Rica is always near the top. It's a healthy and content people at some level by the way that's measured sociologically. There's some, maybe it's a chicken or egg. Which came first? Are they happy and they want to preserve their land, or are they happy because their lands are safe? Well, it's a whole complex of factors, of course. But it's a well-educated, peaceful nation that is a really beautiful country with all range of habitats, with highlands, cloud forests, and lowland rainforests, and coastal ecosystems, and seasonal tropical systems, and great surfing if you want to go surf, great fishing, great coral reefs. Amazing example based on really a couple of leaders there in the 70s and 80s who made a big effort to work on this and for ecotourism, and it's been a great success. Big part of their economy. You can look at Hispaniola and the different policies in a place like Haiti versus the Dominican Republic. And you can see in a satellite photo the effect of different land use policies at the boundary here between two different countries. Just as a striking visual example, those two countries have very different approaches to land management. Hispaniola being the big island, it's comprised of Dominican Republic in the east and Haiti in the west. Gabon, a country in West Africa, is an amazing recent example where the story goes the president of the country was flying over the country on a long distance trip over the forests and remarking about just, wow, looking at how much forest the country actually had, and just thinking about how interesting the forest is and what an interesting ecosystem, and then had a change of heart, change of intellect, and within a couple of years had put into preservation a huge percentage of the country's land. It's easier in some countries to do that in others, to make those kinds of sweeping changes really fast. A hippo in the ocean here. There are hippos that go surfing in the marine surf out here off of Gabon, one of these protected areas to preserve a really unique ecological situation with hippos in the ocean. Just a picture to emphasize what a wonderful place that is. Tropical rainforest, really dense tropical rainforest in Central Africa. Cool country. The Northwestern Hawaiian Islands Marine Reserve. He's not the poster child maybe for environmental protection, but what did he do? One of the last things he did on his way out with the stroke of a pen, set up one of the biggest marine refuges on the planet. Well done, sir. The initial protection of this area goes all the way back to Teddy Roosevelt, continued through like FDR and Clinton. They all added pieces, but then he just circled this big area and really set high standards for what can and cannot be done in here. And there's economic motivation. It's a great breeding ground for fishes that then are caught and fished for outside of that area. So it has a huge economic impact on the whole region, having a healthy system in which those fish can spawn. He was with Laura at the White House, and old Jacques Cousteau, the documentary filmmaker, his son was there to show a new film that had footage of this area. He got inspired. Sometimes that's all it takes, is inspiring a leader. And he had this power on the way out to make a few changes that just could be done by fiat, and that's one of the things he did. For some of you, this might be interesting volunteer type work to get into. Work in restoration ecology, working on ecosystems that are heavily degraded, that can be rehabilitated. Because one thing that, and this may be personal, but one thing that strikes me about many of these systems is their ability to rebound from human-introduced changes. They're incredibly elastic and robust, many of these systems. And if we would just take our foot off the gas a little bit, they can pop back into form in amazing ways. So the restorative power of these systems is very strong, but that often requires additional management. The whole world is touched by human change. The notion that we should just leave an area alone and leave it to its own devices without human interaction, I think is pretty naive, because there's nowhere on Earth untouched by human dynamics, even if it's only at just the chemical level. So we're inevitably involved in these systems as managers, as influencers. And one of the ways you can influence them positively is in this type of restoration work, restoration ecology. And there's some projects that are starting now that I'm involved with. If you're interested, you could get in touch with me to become involved in. Here's an example of a mined area, a heavily mined area in this quarry in New Jersey. In 10 years, with a lot of work, you plant a bunch of natives and shore up the forests around it, and 10 years you can get a system to bounce back, and you can imagine the functional differences in the dynamics of biogeochemical and hydrological dynamics in a system like that, from a system like this. So it can happen really fast. Some areas faster than others. Our very own park down at the bottom of University. You can take the bus to the bottom of University and go out to the really cool Cesar Chavez Park out there, where you can see burrowing owls, a very rare little owl that hunts by day. They form little burrows out there in that parkland. Well, this was an old dump. It was an old industrial wasteland, basically a dump area, that they covered with soil. They added vents so that the decaying material could outgas from under the newly arranged soil, planted some vegetation, and now you have a beautiful park. Fantastic park for dogs and flying kites and so forth. Just it's a restoration project from what was not too long ago, and a place I urge you to go visit. And that's all we have. Great luck with the exam.